and welcome to the Kennedy Space Center. My name is Thad Altman, president of the Astronauts Memorial Foundation. Today is NASA's Day of Remembrance, where we all across the country pause and remember those astronauts who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country. But we do more than that on this day. We do more by remembering those and renewing our spirit, renewing our commitment for human spaceflight, so their loss is not in vain. That is the ultimate way that we honor those great Americans. As we begin our ceremony, please rise for the presentation of the colors by Vieira High School Army Junior ROTC, followed by the national anthem sung by Delora Middle School Vocal Ensemble. Yes.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red hot, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you. Please be seated. For our invocation, I'd like to introduce Charlie Duke. Charlie Duke, retired Brigadier General, U.S. Air Force. As a NASA astronaut, he was a lunar module pilot for Apollo 16 and is the youngest man to have walked on the moon.
Thank you very much for your warm welcome introduction, Tad. It's a great privilege and honor for me to be here today to be a part of this day of remembrance of the lives of our friends. So let us pray. Our Father, as we gather together to pay tribute and remember our fellow astronauts who gave their lives in service to our nation and its space program, we ask for your blessings on this memorial event. Though many years have passed since their departure from this earth, our sense of loss is no less acute. By their service, dedication, and commitment, they helped expand the knowledge of the universe and help pave the way for our future missions to further understand this incredible universe which you have created. The psalmist says in the scriptures, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of your hands." So, Lord, we acknowledge your presence here today and thank you for your blessings upon our nation. May your grace, love, and mercy be upon the families of those we honor today. Lord, continue to lead our nation into all righteousness and justice, and may we truly be one nation under God. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, General Duke. Today, we are paying a special tribute to the Apollo 1 astronauts who, 50 years ago tomorrow, they perished in a tragic capsule fire in a plug-out test on the pad. In addition to honoring the past, the Astronauts Memorial Foundation, working with our partners, NASA and Delaware North, the operator of the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, we work together to inspire future generations of scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians right here in our Center for Space Education where you're sitting right now. We have some guests here that are an example of the many students that come through the Astronaut Memorial Foundation, the Visitor Center here at Kennedy, because we know that what truly powers rockets, not rocket fuel, it's brain power that powers rockets. So I'd like the students from Apollo Elementary, the Apollo Elementary Eagles, as in the eagle has landed. Please stand. There are a few people I'd like to introduce here. Of course, there are so many special and remarkable people in this room. We could probably go well into the weekend introducing all of them. First, I'd like to start by introducing former KSC Center Director Jay Honeycutt and former board member of the Astronaut Memorial Foundation. Past chairman of the Astronaut Memorial Board. First, our founder, architect Alan Hellman, former astronaut John McBride, and former propulsion engineer and Rockwell engineer Lee Solid. Please stand. And of course, some remarkable human beings that we have here, and it centers around what we do, are Apollo astronauts. I'd like to introduce Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, Charlie Duke, and Tom Stafford. Please stand so we can recognize you. Our shuttle astronauts, John McBride, Bob Cabana, Mike McCauley, and Winston Scott. And finally, our existing astronauts, and we hope these numbers will grow. Rex Walheim, Nicole Mann, Pat Forrester, and Joss Cassada. And finally, most importantly, I would like to recognize the astronaut family members who truly have paid the ultimate sacrifice. First, I'd like to start, and I might say, we have a special place in our hearts for these families and are very much a part of our mission here with the Astronaut Memorial Foundation, NASA, and Delaware North. I'll start with Martha Chaffee, the widow of Apollo astronaut Roger Chaffee. Martha. Bonnie White Baird, the daughter of Apollo 1 astronaut Ed White II. Lowell Grissom, the brother of Apollo 1 astronaut Gus Grissom. And And what I'd like for all the family members that are here supporting our astronauts that we're honoring here today, as well as all families from all of our astronauts that we honor that have given their lives in service of the country. Please stand for everybody to see. And what a great turnout we have here today. Thank you. As you know, we honor 24 astronauts, the 2 Columbia accidents, Apollo 1, and numerous other training accidents. I'd like to introduce a few more of our family members. Karen Stevenson, daughter of the astronaut Charles Bassett; Faith Freedom Thompson, the daughter of astronaut Theodore Freeman; June Scobie Rogers, widow of Challenger astronaut Dick Scobie; Kathy Scobie Fulgham, daughter of Challenger Commander Dick Scobie; Mary Curtis Travich, niece of astronaut Clifton Williams. Please stand. We welcome you, and this tribute is for you. Thank you for your sacrifice in the great pursuit of human exploration of space. Without you and the support of the families, this would all not be possible. Our astronauts repeatedly say the most important thing for them are their families.
Good morning. My name is Eileen Collins. I'm a former astronaut, and I'm currently the chairman of the Astronaut Memorial Foundation. Today we're here to remember the bravery of the 3 Apollo 1 astronauts that gave their lives in the name of space exploration. This accident raised the awareness of the amount of risk that we were taking in trying to get people to the moon. It showed us the importance of what that mission was. And I believe that many in my generation decided that they wanted to be astronauts because of what we learned in the Apollo program. And it was the astronauts like Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee that inspired me to go on and study math and science in school, to join the Air Force to become a pilot, and to eventually apply to the astronaut program myself someday. Their dedication and bravery and service to the mission will never be forgotten.
It's just like any other national tragedy. You can remember where you were and what you were doing at the time. Well, it's the same way with those missions, those launches, as well as those tragedies. It was January 27th, 1967. Routine day at the Kennedy Space Center, testing multiple spacecraft. Apollo 1 mission rocket and spacecraft is at Pad 34 doing a major test, but still routine. The astronauts involved were Gus Grissom, who was the commander of the mission, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. Well, during the test, when the crew was in the crew module, hatch closed, with an environment 100% oxygen, something ignited inside the cabin, and in that environment, the fire quickly propagated, and before anybody had a chance to really react, the crew died as a result of that fire.
It was all over in one stunned, horrifying second. As dawn rose this morning over the sands of Canaveral, we had tasted tragedy.
The significance of Apollo 1 was twofold. It brought out to everybody in society the risks associated with going to the moon or any human spaceflight program. It also indicated that significant changes were needed in the design of the spacecraft and our procedures and our expectations for, at that time, completing the Apollo mission, getting there safely, and returning the crew. I think history should remember the Apollo 1 crew as pioneers who really took the first step and probably the most important step in getting us to the moon and back safely.
I would like to introduce Robert Lightfoot, one of our speakers today. Mr. Lightfoot is former Center Director of Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, was the Associate Administrator of NASA, and who now is currently serving as the Acting Administrator of NASA, the American Space Agency. Mr. Lightfoot.
Thanks, Dad, and thanks everyone for being here. It's truly an honor to be here with so many friends and family members of our NASA team. We do believe NASA is a family, and I specifically want to welcome the families and thank you for your sacrifice and being here with us today. Our work at NASA is so generational, it's so inspirational. I think it's just awesome that we have the kids here joining us today, because my generation stands on the shoulders of these giants that we're honoring and we're recognizing today. Those giants started this business of us traveling further into space and breaking the bonds of gravity. They started us on that, and we got to continue that even further and learn the lessons from the past. Every year at this time, NASA remembers all of our brave family members we've lost and have given everything, the full sacrifice to advance this mission of exploration that we believe in, that humanity believes in so much. Particularly poignant, as you see, this year because it marks 50 years since Apollo 1. And we know that we will never forget them, and we owe great debt today for what they taught us and what we learned and how we got to continue the journey. We'll also never forget the crew members of Challenger and Columbia and other members of our teams that have sacrificed all, getting us to this point as an agency. As I said last night at a special dinner for the Apollo 1 family, we've chosen a tough business, an unforgiving business, but the reward for that is the pursuit of knowledge and the advancement of what we learn as human beings. It's written in our soul, written in our DNA to continue that journey. And these folks committed everything to that journey, and we should learn from that and make sure that we don't repeat those mistakes going forward. I know every member of the NASA family has the utmost respect for the brave men and women who have sacrificed and attempted to do this hard thing of breaking the bonds of gravity as we move forward. Each of us is kind of drawn into this pursuit. I said last night, it's as much a hobby as it is a job for us, the passion of making sure that we keep pushing the envelope, keep pushing further, that dream of discovery, that dream of learning something we didn't know. And that's what we need to keep doing, but we can't forget. We can't forget our fallen heroes, and they are heroes. To those of us in my generation who watched as these folks pushed that envelope and ultimately got us to the moon, that's why I'm here. That's why most of the people in my generation are here. Our generation has to spur that generation so that we keep doing it. And every time we do that, we need to not forget what we learned along the way so that we can keep growing and keep going forward. The memorial plaque out at pad 34, at the end of it, it reads, "Remember them not for how they died, but for those ideals for which they lived." I think that's a tremendous statement because I want everyone here, especially the family members that are here with us, to know we remember these as heroes of our space exploration program, but we also recognize these were mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters as well. For us, they exemplify the pioneering spirit that helped to get us where we are today, and we'll build off that spirit as we continue to push humans further and further into space. They will not be forgotten. Godspeed, Apollo 1, Challenger, Columbia, and all the members of our family who have fallen in the line of duty for us here at NASA. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker here today, very close to a number of our family members, Michael Collins. Michael Collins is the NASA astronaut who flew both Gemini and shuttle missions, was the lunar module pilot on Apollo 11, our first manned landing on the moon. As he was circling the moon, that man right back there, Buzz Aldrin, was walking on the moon. And Buzz, thank you for being here. It's very special that you have us here. So, I'd like to introduce Apollo astronaut Michael Collins.
Your faces bring back so many memories, good and bad. And then old friends, dead and alive, Challenger, Columbia. Today we're not here for a space launch, no launch this time, but just as important to contemplate a launch which did not take place, but which in many ways was as important as any which flew later. Without Apollo 1 and the lessons learned from it, in all probability, such a fire would have taken place later in flight, and not only the crew, but the entire spacecraft would have been lost, and NASA, with no machinery to examine, could only guess at the causes and how to prevent still another occurrence. Yes, Apollo 1 did cause 3 deaths, but I believe it saved more than 3 later. It slowed things down for a year or so, but we gained more than a year in time because of increased reliability that permitted flight scheduling later on. Without it, very likely we would have not landed on the moon as the president had wished by the end of the decade. Grissom, White, Chaffee, Kennedy. I think these 4 names are appropriately mentioned in the same breath. But today I'd like to describe why they were chosen for this great honor, which was going to go way beyond anything anyone had done before. Our astronaut boss, Deke Slayton, used to say he considered all crews to be the same. And I think he meant that all were fully qualified. But beyond that, think about the end of the Gemini program and put yourself in Deke's shoes. When he and all of the nation were looking toward a whole new dimension, a lunar-capable craft. Who do you trust with this giant responsibility of developing such a craft? Deke picked Gus Grissom. Gus had made the second Mercury flight and the first Gemini flight, so he was as experienced as anyone, and he was single-mindedly devoted to the program. Beyond that, he had a talent for engineering that put him at the top. He was a good test pilot, sure, but beyond that, he had a fascination with, almost a love for, the complex new machinery that he had to examine critically, to learn, and to master. If you were looking for Gus, try the night shift at the factory. He'd be there in the cockpit. Deke picked Ed White. I knew Ed White long before there was a space program in the autumn of 1948. Good grief. Coming up on 70 years. Huh. Anyway, I first caught sight of Ed White when we were freshmen. We were plebes at West Point, and we were trying out for the soccer team. There were about 60 of us in a huge field, disorganized, people running everywhere and kicking one another. I remember a mass of nondescript bodies with one red-haired streak weaving through them, faster and stronger than all the rest. Ed later abandoned soccer for track, and he was on the Academy mile relay team, which was one of the ones that was ranked very high in the whole country. Ed took to the Air Force kind of like a duck to water, fighter pilot, experimental test pilot, master's degree. But in addition to all that athletic and flying stuff, Ed stood out as an outspoken patriot. Apollo to him was a manifestation of what made this country great. And he was happy to get that thought across wherever and whenever he could. Once I was on a Gemini backup crew with Ed, and I followed him with amazement. If you were looking for him, you'd find him out somewhere converting the doubters to the virtues of the Apollo program. Deke picked Roger Chaffee. Roger and I were selected in the third group of astronauts in 1963. We were called by the press the Apollo astronauts as opposed to the Mercury and Gemini ones. And sure enough, Roger was the first in our group to be assigned to an Apollo flight. Roger wanted to fly. We all did. Roger wanted to fly to the moon. We all did. What made Roger different, for me anyway, was that the moon was not simply a destination for him. It was a fascinating planet whose rocks he wanted to hold in his hand and who wanted to study the surface with the same insight and the same precision that a professional scientist, probably a geologist, would be able to do. If you were looking for Roger, he'd be burning the midnight oil, a moon atlas on one knee, a geology textbook on the other. Deke picked Gus, Ed, and Roger. As usual, he knew what he was doing. Thank you, Deke. And to each of you who knew these three men so well, thank you for your sacrifices. The Apollo crew was magnificent.
We're so blessed that we have two of the crew of Apollo 11, the first landing. We wish we could have John Glenn here with us still, but thank you so much for being here and for being with us today. I also want to introduce a very special astronaut who also flew with these very, very, very unique human individuals. Tom Stafford. Tom, please stand for us so we can recognize you. Tom flew both Gemini and Apollo and knew these astronauts very well. And thank you for being here, Tom. I don't think a program would be complete if we did not have a very special guest, a member of the families of Apollo 1. Cheryl Chaffee is on the board, is former NASA employee here at Kennedy Space Center. I'd like to introduce Cheryl Chaffee, who'd like to say a few words.
Good morning. On January 27, 1967, my little 8-year-old world was torn apart. On that evening, my mother had to tell my brother, Stephen, and me that our daddy was never coming home. I'm not sure at 8 that I truly understood death. What did never coming home mean? My mother did her best to explain, but she too was devastated and trying to understand. I remember having dreams of him walking through our front door with just a Band-Aid on his hand and telling us he was still alive. I had this dream over and over again. I could not believe that it has been 50 years since I lost my father, along with his Apollo 1 crewmates, Gus and Ed. Although on that January day they lost their lives right across the river at Complex 34 on Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, their story certainly did not end there, and their legacy lives on today. I'm so proud to be here today with all of you to pay tribute to my father, his crewmates, and the other fallen astronauts memorialized on the Space Mirror. It was not easy growing up without a father, and it definitely was not easy growing up without a father that the world considered a hero. As a young child, I don't think I really considered my father as a hero, or even really understood the impact of what an astronaut did. I struggled to understand why he was gone, why he had to die, and how could I possibly live up to the hero image and make my father proud. I was angry, sad, and confused. From the ashes of Apollo 1 fire came hard lessons that NASA had to learn in order to have successful flights to the moon and for further exploration of space. These lessons learned changed the way NASA looked at the safety of the crew. Because of the Apollo 1 crew, the great team that worked day and night on the space program, and the families that sacrificed their loved ones, NASA was able to make President Kennedy's pledge to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth, and we continued our exploration of space. In 1983, I had the opportunity to join the NASA workforce here at the Kennedy Space Center. Walking the halls of the headquarters building and the operations and checkout building, I knew I was walking in the footsteps of my father and other heroes like him. I worked for NASA for 33 years and just recently retired. I was fortunate to meet and work with people that were here when the fire happened, that knew my father, Gus and Ed, and that would have given their lives if they could so the crew would not have been lost. I was at work on that cold January day when the Challenger blew up and understood the loss and the heartbreak those families were going through. I watched the television for hours after Columbia did not return, hoping it was just some mistake and it was making another lap around the Earth to land later. I felt their pain. Over the years, my pain and anger have eased, and I have learned that there is nothing I can do to change the past. I learned that even though I will never forget all these tragedies, I am able to move forward, to be the best daughter my father could have, and to always keep him alive in my heart. Just a few days before the 1-year anniversary of the Challenger accident, I noticed a flower arrangement in the headquarters lobby that was there in memory of the Challenger crew. On a personal note, I was a little hurt as it was also coming up on the 20th anniversary of the Apollo 1 fire, and I felt no one remembered. So I took that into my own hands. I ordered flowers in honor of Apollo 1 and had them placed in the headquarters lobby next to the Challenger flowers. At that moment, it became my mission to make sure we never forget the Apollo 1 crew and all our other fallen astronauts. On behalf of all the families, I thank the Astronaut Memorial Foundation for hosting this NASA Day of Remembrance, for all of you being here today, and for letting me tell you a little bit of my story. Thank you.
You know, I think it's important we pay tribute to all those aerospace workers, the engineers, the technicians, the folks that really make it possible for these wonderful Americans to be at the tip of the spear, the top of the rocket. We have one here today who actually was working the day of the Apollo 1 tragedy. He's a retired engineer, aerospace worker, John Tribe.
Good morning. I'm very honored and proud to be here as a representative of the Apollo 1 team that worked the plugs out test on Pad 34 50 years ago tomorrow. I'd like to just say briefly how what happened that day affected me and affected the rest of the team, the ones that were involved in the program at that time. On the evening of the fire, I was on station in the spacecraft control room when we got the announcement of the fire. After that, everything happened so fast as we struggled to comprehend what that announcement meant. It was incomprehensible to us how on earth we could have a fire in the cockpit. We sat there remote from the pad. We were bewildered and helpless. We had no communications with anybody out there. We did not know what had happened, why it had happened, or what was going on at that time. Finally, the pad leader, Don Babbitt, got to a communication box that worked and gave us a very veiled assessment of the situation out there. We had imagined the worst, we'd hoped for the best. It was not to be. We'd lost 3 of our team. It was a moment that would live with me and for the rest of the team forever. And while we sat isolated up there in that control room, out of touch, out on the pad itself on levels A7 and A8, we had technicians there in a frantic commotion, trying to do something to get the crew out of that cockpit. Within seconds of the first call, the vehicle basically exploded on the inside. The pressure vessel ruptured, and that threw debris out through the open access doors on the command module that spread across the A8 level, burning technicians, setting fire to papers on the desk of the pad leader. And the flames licked up the side of the command module towards the live launch escape rocket that sat on top. And the situation was extremely dangerous. Those guys fought those fires. 6 of them in pairs of 2 entered the white room, which was full of black, toxic smoke. They couldn't breathe, they couldn't see, they burned their hands, but they finally got those hatches off. Unfortunately, it was all in vain. And it all happened so fast. This was all over in 5 minutes. Those men who fought so hard to get the crew out that night were given the NASA Extreme Bravery Medal. They were Jim Gleaves, Steve Clemens, L.D. Reese, Jerry Hawkins, and Hank Rogers. And their efforts were recognized and have been recognized in the new memorial tribute that is opening tomorrow morning out in the Visitor Center. The lives of each of those men were indelibly changed that night. And unfortunately, none of them are with us here today at this ceremony, but some of the members of the families are, and we welcome them here today. The nation mourned the Apollo loss after that event, and the program seemed to falter. For all of us down here, I think we felt a collective responsibility. They were our guys, they were part of our team, and we'd screwed up. The schedule pressure and the long hours we were all working back then made us focus so much on what we were doing that we weren't really aware of the big picture. We should never have put those 3 guys into that capsule that night in the conditions that they experienced. We had to do better if the program was to continue. So we immediately began a task of saying, okay, what do we do to make this a better spacecraft and a better program? We brought spacecraft 12, which was Apollo 1, back this side of the river. we got spacecraft 14 sent down, which was the next one in line, and we systematically dismantled those vehicles, looking for every conceivable way we could improve their performance and safety. It went all the way from a totally new, fast-operating, outward-opening hatch that we could open in 5 seconds instead of the 30 seconds that it took to get the old hatches off. We came up with a new two-gas system in the cockpit so we would not have a 100% oxygen environment. We conformally coated every bare terminal and wire in the vehicle. We made better coverings on all the wire runs, and we got rid of all the flammables or controlled them very strictly on access into the vehicle. Procedures and safety plans were totally overhauled down here. We learned an awful lot from that evening, and we made for a safer program. But 21 months were to pass before we were ready to fly a manned Apollo. Apollo 7 with Wally Schirra, Don Isley, and Walt Cunningham flew in October 1968. And hard as it is to believe, just a few months later, we went around the moon. And then in July of 1969, less than a year later after Apollo 7, Mike, Buzz, and Neil went to the moon and returned safely. Kennedy's challenge had been met. And I look back on this traumatic period of my life and realize that while some might say that we got to the moon despite Apollo 1, I'd like to suggest we got to the moon because of Apollo 1. Gus said, if we die, we want people to accept it. The conquest of space is worth the risk of life. Gus, Ed, and Roger paid that price in 1967, but they did not die in vain. The phoenix that arose from their sacrifice made the lunar landing possible and resurrected this nation's pride at a time in our history when things were very tumultuous. I will never forget that crew and will always recognize their ultimate contribution. Thank you, Apollo 1.
Thank you, John. Thank you for being here. I'd like to now introduce Brandon Heath, 6-time Grammy-nominated artist, very talented musician who has a special tribute that he'd like to offer. And we're so blessed to have such great talented artists who are really, really strong space supporters. Brandon Heath.
They had to have a guy with a guitar here today. My name is Brandon. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a songwriter, and I'm a big fan of space. When I was a kid, I remember sitting on the end of the bed as my mom folded laundry the day that the Challenger didn't make it to space, to where they were going. And something was born in me that day. I was here last year for the day of remembrance for them and was so honored to be here. And I shared a song last year. That's what we songwriters do. We just sing. But I want to tell you a few things that are really important to me as a civilian. I'm sitting on an impressive row of people there, but I'm just one of the commoners out there. And there are some brave men and women in the room that I just need to say on behalf of all of us, we desperately need heroes in our country. We need people to inspire us. And some of the greatest people, a part of man's greatest achievement, are sitting in the room right now. And that's no small thing that is landing on me right now. I'm really nervous. But I needed to say that because I hope that I'm a great man. My granddad fought in World War II. I'm wearing his wedding ring right now. And he looked up to you guys. And so on his behalf and all the rest of us men and women that are just looking for people to model our lives after, and to face fear in the face, and not to be afraid, and to innovate. So especially for us who write songs and create and hopefully inspire from a musical standpoint, I very thankfully got to know an Apollo astronaut by the name of Gene Cernan. Now, I'm not going to say we were fishing buddies. We weren't best friends. But I spent a few weekends with he and his wife, Jan, and he invited me to come to the premiere of his movie, The Last Man on the Moon, in New York last year, almost a year ago. I remember after seeing the movie and after days and days of press junkets and interviews and promotion, we shared a cab back to his hotel, and there weren't a lot of words. He was exhausted. But the time that I did get to spend with Gene was really inspiring. And so he was a cowboy of the highest caliber. And so I wrote him a cowboy song a few days ago, just to send him a farewell. And I'm going to play it for you guys right now. Saddle up, cowboy, take off, fly, boy, go find your piece of sky. Yippee-ki-yay through the Milky Way like a lonesome satellite. And we'll find some field where the air is clear as your light goes sailing by to the deep horizon faster than goodbye. Tell me your story, I want to hear it again. About the far side of the moon where mystery lives. Did you really see with your own eyes heaven's door? Did you leave a piece of your heart on God's front porch? Saddle up, cowboy, take off, fly, boy, go find your piece of sky. Yippee-ki-yay through the Milky Way like a lonesome satellite. And we'll find some field where the air is clear as your light goes sailing by to the deep horizon faster than goodbye. See again, and that seems strange, but you're out there somewhere riding on the range. Saddle up, cowboy, take off, fly, boy, go find your piece of sky. Yippee-ki-yay through the Milky Way like a lonesome satellite. Saddle up, cowboy, take off, fly, boy, find your piece of sky. Yippee-ki-yay through the Milky Way like a lonesome satellite. And we'll find some field where the air is clear as your light goes sailing by. Goodbye. God bless. Thank you.
That is the first time that anyone's ever heard that song. And I just think it shows you the great inspiration that this magnificent endeavor of human space flight inspires in all Americans. I'd like to introduce the man that I've gotten to know really well. Bob Cabana, the center director here at Kennedy Space Center, has led KSC with such incredible grace in some incredibly challenging times. Bob has been the director of Kennedy Space Center longer than anyone else except for Kurt Debus. Bob, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Thad, and thanks to all of you for coming today to share in our Day of Remembrance. You know, we've talked about heroes a lot, and I think those of us that have the privilege to fly in space, we don't see ourselves as heroes. We're blessed to be able to do what we've been called to do, what we actually love doing. I think the real heroes of the space program, they're the families that have allowed us to fulfill our dreams, to reach our goals, and the team on the ground that has made it all possible. Each year at this time, we come together and we pause to remember those that paid the ultimate sacrifice in our quest to explore beyond our home planet. We honor the crews and we remember the smiles on their faces as they fulfilled their lifelong dreams. And we paused to enforce the lessons learned so they're not repeated again in the future. Looking back, no one in a position of authority ever made a decision that they thought would put a crew at risk. What was dangerous about a ground test out at the pad? Why was it too cold to launch? We've seen soot on the O-rings before and nothing happened. Yes, foam came off the tank. We've had foam come off the tank before. It never did critical damage. In 1967, I was in high school in Minnesota, and I was too far removed from Apollo 1 to really be impacted by it. In 1986, I was an astronaut candidate in a simulator training to fly in space. And although I knew the crew and was greatly impacted by their loss, they were my friends, having just come from Pax River and flight test where aircraft and lives were lost, I accepted it as part of the business. In 2003, I was out at midfield at the shuttle landing facility waiting for the crew to return. And it fell on me to tell the families that their loved ones weren't coming home. And I was crushed. I don't ever want to be in that position again. It's so important that we learn from the past and create an environment where all opinions are heard and discussed, where everyone feels free to voice their concerns, where everyone is listened to, and all data is brought forward so that an informed decision can be made. Creating and maintaining a culture of trust and openness is the greatest lesson we can learn from the past, and it's critical to our future success and the success of our commercial partners. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 1 fire, and we've gone too long without a memorial for Gus, Ed, and Roger here at the Kennedy Space Center. Just as we have honored the crews of Challenger and Columbia with Forever Remembered at the Atlantis facility, in cooperations with the families of the Apollo 1 crew, we're opening a new tribute out at the Saturn V facility tomorrow to honor them. Ad Astra per Aspera, a rough road leads to the stars. It's a fitting tribute to the Apollo 1 crew, those that tried to save them, and those that took us on to the moon. So as we pause today to remember all the heroes we have lost, let us rededicate ourselves to creating a culture that encourages everyone to be heard and seeks to evaluate all the data in the decisions we make that one day take us to Mars and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cabana. I'd like to just share a few thoughts. I know I was here on Merritt Island when we saw the Space Shuttle Challenger explode. I've never experienced anything like it, never experienced such collective grief, never experienced the unity of the human spirit and the way people came together after that tragic event. And we realized suddenly we had no place to mourn or memorialize our astronaut, no place to go. And I remember there was an article in the paper, and everyone, thousands of people, went out to the beaches and shined a flashlight onto the ocean. We wanted to be together. We wanted to remember. And our founder, Alan Hellman, had a vision. Let's build a memorial, not just a memorial of steel and granite, but let's build a living memorial so we can inspire future generations of rocket scientists and astronauts, so we can remember those very, very special Americans that flew, remember those engineers and scientists that made that happen, and especially remember and support the families that really, really suffered the most and paid the ultimate sacrifice. So we had the idea of a specialty license tag, the only one, first one in the country. Virtually everything we do, from our classes to our memorial to this facility, is made possible by those 20,000 or so Floridians who purchased that license tag. So many of those were of America's greatest generation, and we're losing them. We need a whole nother generation to help support our efforts to inspire future rocket scientists. So if you haven't had that opportunity to purchase that license tag, please consider. That's going to help us to continue to do programs like this and to continue to educate our youth. I'd like to reintroduce Charlie Duke.
It's my privilege to read the names of each of the 24 astronauts that we honor today. And we'll follow that by a moment of silence. Theodore C. Freeman, Charles A. Bassett II, Elliot M.C. Jr., Clifton C. Williams, Jr., Virgil Gus Grissom, Edward H. White II, Roger B. Chaffee, Michael J. Adams, Robert H. Lawrence, Jr., Francis Dick Scobie, Michael J. Smith, Judith A. Resnick, Ellison S. Onizuka, Ronald E. McNair, Gregory B. Jarvis, Krista McAuliffe, Manly L. Sonny Carter, Jr., Rick D. Husband, William C. McCool, Michael P. Anderson, Kolpana Chadwala, David M. Brown, Laurel Clark, and Elon Ramon. Thank you.
That concludes the program here in our facility. We'll follow this with a laying of a wreath, weather permitting, a flyover at the Astronaut Memorial that you just saw on the screen. I'd like to ask our astronauts, our Apollo astronauts, to first begin to walk out there, as well as our family members, So if everyone can wait, and our family members and our astronauts, our shuttle astronauts and our current astronaut corps, to begin proceeding out there. There'll be folks helping you walk out there, and anyone who may need a ride, we have carts and vehicles to help bring them out there. So we'll let them depart first. The Astronaut Memorial Foundation, the actual Space Mirror Memorial that was built here at the Space Center with our Challenger Columbia license tag funds, is a 42-foot tall, 50-foot wide granite structure, and on it has engraved the names of all those who've died in duty as U.S. astronauts. The names are cut through the granite, and the light penetrates, lighting up those names of those astronauts.